short presentations from our panelists, and then we will move into some questions that I have prepared for the panel. And then after that, we'll move into question and answer. So make sure that you use that Q&A box down below. It's right down below, okay? So first up is Mindy Fullilove, who will be presenting. And after that will be Jeremy. After that will be Joe. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I just want to say hazards of suburban living. The neighbors all decided to mow their lawn right now. They just started. I hope you can hear me. Is it okay? Is it, I'm being found out? No? Okay.
We can hear you. You sound great.
Great. At nighttime, it's the kids with the firecrackers, but daytime, it's the dads with the lawnmowers. So I have a few slides that I wanted to walk you through just to talk about where we are now and how I think, what are the things that we can do to get through this moment. And I think Zakia is going to share her screen and show the slides, maybe.
Dr. Fullilove, you should be able to share from your end now. If you give it a quick try and it doesn't work, then I can definitely do it from my side.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. I wanted to start the sort of where we are now with two graphs that came out in the Times on the 6th that I think are really stunning. One is this look at coronavirus cases per 10,000 people. This is the most in-depth look so far at the data that we have. We don't have complete data, but showing the disparities in who's getting sick and how this is virus is hitting all of these various communities. And the second one is this graph of the total number of cases. And you can see the red line of the US started to go down in May as we thought it would. We thought by then we would be on our way to flattening the curve. But what happened instead was that people didn't believe that geographic spread was a part of how diseases propagate. And so they were not taking precautions, and it exploded in all the secondary centers. We're not in a second wave, but we are in the secondary centers. And really is going out of control. My research team, the Cities Research Group, did a project in the aftermath of 9/11 called NYC Recovers. That we had studied what happens to communities in disaster, communities that had been torn apart in one way or another. And we thought, given what we know about how disasters fall on communities, what can we contribute to repair? And one of the things we knew for sure was that the focus at that point on heroes and victims wasn't enough, that the terrorist attack had affected really literally everybody in the greater New York region, and you could say the whole country. So our project was a collaboration of organizations that were concerned with the social and emotional recovery of New York City. And I believe you can see my cursor. I just want to point out how this logo, which is made September 20th, it has all of the buildings are disconnected from this line of the ground, and the buildings are separate from each other. And that is very much how that moment felt. We started off with two organizations, and then we went forward from there. Asking ourselves, what is it that organizations can do? We look to the science of cities, and in this schematic, you'll see that people think of cities as having government and policymakers at the top, organizations of all kinds in the middle, and then communities, people who are grouped into communities sort of at the bottom of this pyramid. But organizations come to play a key role in this analysis because they connect to other organizations, they can advocate to policymakers, and they connect to communities. And so our project really said to organizations, you can incorporate social and emotional recovery into what you do. If you're a supermarket, you can promote broccoli instead of comfort food. If you're a scouting organization, you can help kids think about the homeless. There are all kinds of things that organizations can do, and every organization, by playing a role, we'll get to everybody in the community. So what does somebody do? This is an example from this epidemic, and it is Milton Glasser, who is the designer who created I Love New York, one of the most famous designs of all time. And he was working on thinking about how would you write together so that you'd have sort of the individual differences, but also the sense of unity. And this is the design where it stood at the time of his death. This is what the sort of his taking on a piece. I'm a designer, what is my piece in this catastrophe? And thinking that one of the things that's important is for people to understand how, if we're having different experiences, can we possibly be together? Out of such work, we can mend not only the ways in which society is fractured by the disaster, but also the pre-existing fractures that we know about of racism, classism, sexism, and all those other isms. So what did that look like in our project, our 9/11 project? You can see our original logo up in the corner, sort of gray and sad, and the buildings all floating. After our project, A Year of Recovery, we had a party for all our partners came, and we invited them to write on our banner. And you can see that, among other things, the people who were at the party connected to the bottom. We figured out all the ways that we anchor the buildings, and then the buildings are connected to each other. This not only is is a vision of a future in which we are together, it also represents real relationships that got built. And one of the things about those relationships is that those relationships have continued until this present moment to be sources of advocacy and healing for the communities. For example, the people in Washington Heights Inwood who were part of NYC Recovers are still working together, and now they're going on Black Lives Matters marches. So collective recovery, where we ask every organization, what is your mission and what aligns with your mission that you see as helping your constituents recover? If we were to do this and use our networks to share ideas and inspire one another, we have the possibility of slowing some of the trauma and some of the disaster that's coming towards us. And I'm going to stop the share. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Jeremy?
You're on mute, Jeremy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy Liu. I'm a senior fellow at PolicyLink, and with PolicyLink, I support the work of thinking about how arts and culture can help support and accelerate equitable development through policy and practice. I'm really excited to actually follow Mindy because over the last 4 years, we've been working very closely with Art Place America in their Community Development Investments Initiative, where we've spent a great deal of time thinking and working closely with 6 community development organizations from around the country, including right in Philadelphia, the Fairmont Park Conservancy, to really understand how incorporating arts and culture strategies can actually help improve their work. And these are 6 organizations really deeply grounded in their communities. By all accounts, they have the kind of grounding and connection to place and people that would presuppose that they have the connections to the social fabric, the constituency concerns and whatnot that Mindy really alludes to and really speaks to directly. What we're really excited to be able to say is that after 4 years, we've found that even the most connected of these organizations can find ways of actually more deeply centering and lifting up the voice and agency of their community. And arts and culture has been a really key way that has happened. We've published a series of briefs on this topic. They can be found at communitydevelopment.art online. Some of them include how to work with artists, so very sort of technical approaches, but also more specifically two that refer to this question of how arts and culture can help support community agency and in a lot of ways sort of utilizing culture as a way of being resilient. Are a brief on a brief on community organizing and community engagement, and how arts and culture has been a role for these 6 organizations in community organizing, community engagement. The big headline there is that arts and culture actually processes and working with artists have helped these 6 organizations really move their practice from engagement, which I think nearly all community development organizations would say they're involved in at some level, into the realm of real community organizing, where building up the power of community members is a central element of that kind of work. So that's really exciting. And the second is a forthcoming brief that will be published on how arts and culture have supported these organizations to strengthen the social fabric in communities. Again, really getting at the great example that Mindy shared around the NYC story. And it's certainly not as large as an entire city, but in each of these 6 stories, there are places where we've really seen how arts have really become a part of these organizations becoming more competent and focused on social fabric as a place where they can advance their work as well. And I was going to talk to you a little bit about some of those examples, but I want to start with an overview, a sort of theory of change diagram that, again, is pre-release. You'll see it in the brief at communitydevelopment.art, and I'll go ahead and share that with you now. So hopefully this is big enough for you to see, but again, this will be available in the brief that's forthcoming. And what this is a theory of change that my colleague Lori Chang, working with Victor Rubin, has developed around how arts and culture really becomes a key part of the long-term change goals of communities and community development. In some ways, this is specifically around the way community development organizations operate, and less a broad framework around how arts and culture works generally for advancing community development goals. On the left, you'll see sort of the existing conditions. In some cases, as Mindy alluded to, these are missing, right? That the social fabric has been rent from past disruptions, whether through urban renewal, COVID, for instance, or even intentional sort of disruption through white supremacists or anti-Black or racist patterns of policies. And then on the other input you see in pre-existing condition is that there are organizations, again, as Mindy has described, that are situated in communities that are tackling and addressing topics. And in the middle, you'll see the arts and partnership activities. And again, this is a big bucket of just hundreds of different approaches that these 6 organizations undertook over the course of 3 years. And then on the right, you see the way we have been able to draw out sort of the outputs and the outcomes. And again, one of the big important outcomes is that we see that there's more bottom-up governance happening in these communities when these processes are incorporated into their work. In the left of the pink section, you'll see an organizational preconditions. That topic is covered by a brief on organizational change, again, available at the website, already published. At the top of that, you see the capacity to engage and organize residents through cultural strategies. That's that other brief I mentioned. And so I really encourage you to go to the website to find these more detailed resources that, again, I'm not going to be able to get into any great depth in 5 minutes. But I will offer 2 things. One, the definition of what we mean by social fabric, and then also a few key takeaways from specific organizations that we've seen. For our purposes, social fabric, we define it as the formally and informally recognized systems of the people that people relate to, who are the people in your neighborhood, so to quote someone famous, And then also the where and how people relate to each other. This sort of where is that physical piece, whether it's housing, small businesses, neighborhood plazas. The how is the traditions, the stories, the music, the forms of gathering. And then the who is just the people themselves, and who are the connectors and who are the folks who are the outliers. It's all of them, and how do we understand how these three elements work together to become and weave the social fabric. I love, Mindy, that you use the word mend, and that's really part of what we've seen happening. I really want to talk a little bit about Fairmont Park, because this is really relevant and close to a lot of your experiences in Philadelphia. Really, one of the most exciting things we saw was that Fairmont Park, working with Amber Arts and Design in Philadelphia, was actually able to transform what felt like othering in a neighborhood into belonging. And for an long-standing, mainstream-focused institution to really be able to make that authentic transformation for a specific neighborhood, the Strawberry Mansion neighborhood in Philadelphia, was really a remarkable, remarkable accomplishment. And we think that the arts and culture approaches accelerated that, grounded it deeply, and actually is going to leave a legacy for the organization, the Fairmont Park Conservancy, that really supports them being really deeply connected to communities, and also engaged, again, as Mindy has alluded to, in the process of building up the social fabric and being a part of it, being really integrally connected to it in a way that they haven't at least in that particular neighborhood before. I want to just wrap up by saying, these are incredible times where just tremendous amounts of disruption. The long-standing 400 years or more legacy, as Mindy's really helped many people see, of racism and slavery that we still feel to this day, the COVID and whatnot. We do think that this is a time for renewal, right? For community development corporations to really be a part of taking up this mantle for change. And I'll end with this thought that, community development corporations, the original form was created, in the 60s, so over 50, 60 years old right now. And we are at a tremendously different time in the life of this country, and the context of technology and approaches to the work, that we really think it's time for there to be more and more CDCs, but really cast potentially in a different form than the way they were when they were originally cast. And we call these platform CDCs that really leverage the greatest asset of community development corporations, and that's the people, right? The leadership that governs, the boards that govern the work, and really build off of that as a platform for change. Thank you for having me today, and I'm excited to discuss more.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Joe?
I think I've been invited here as the OG. It's been a long time since, as Tempest alluded, I was a community organizer and a CDC director in the 70s, and had a chance to observe and be part of building the movement across the country, and been somewhat an historian of it. So I want to tie into some of what both Dr. Fullilove and Jeremy said, and make 4 quick comments to get us going from my point of view in a few minutes. I want to start talking specifically about CDCs, but I think pertaining much more broadly to people who see themselves in the business of equitable development, from whatever their tools and whatever their institutional position. But I want to move from the narrow to the broad. And so first I want to say to my CDC colleagues, the CDCs that I observed across several cities, and the one in which in Baltimore I'm still an active volunteer, I want to congratulate you for pivoting and opening and finding a way to serve your community in completely inventive ways in a time when you're in free fall. And you've ignored the institutional fears and imperatives to reposition your resources, use your people in a different kind of way, serve needs like food and health information and immigrant resources, to be part of throwing over the Jim Crow we all live with in different ways and finding new services. And I think that has demonstrated what we have always known but sometimes forget to assert, and that is that while CDCs are often most known for their housing work, 90% of CDCs do more than housing, from community organizing to services to workforce programs to advocacy. And this moment has shown many of those kind of activities coming to the fore. We know that CDCs are multi-agenda organizations. Maybe comprehensiveness is a word to use, but most organizations have no ability to be comprehensive, and it may not be a good idea. I think what has evolved as more sustainable practice is collaborating with other organizations to become multi-agended, and you become more and more comprehensive by accretion over time. And so 20, 30 years out, a lot of organizations that started doing A versus B programs start to look alike. But I think also it shows that CDCs and community-based development organizations of all kinds have been nimble and entrepreneurial, finding new ways. Think, for example, in Philadelphia, even of corridor managers. As the corridors shut down, corridor managers becoming counselors and some cases consolers to people doing business on the street, listening to the fears of business owners that they can't even share with their families because their livelihood is at stake, and trying to figure out new ways to serve. One of the corridor managers in a PACDC Zoom call talked about having a little more time, since he's not on the street as much, to start doing research to help his constituency. And he's looking at the national associations of the kind of businesses that are on his corridor, retailers, restaurateurs, to see what the national associations are starting to think about as future practice. And I think, you know, CDC staff, whether they're corridor managers or in housing or planning or organizing or community schools, have huge strength in relationship building and connecting people. And we're going to need to use those skills more than anything, since nobody quite clearly sees the future. So I want to congratulate you for being as comprehensive as you are and being nimble. I think as we think about finding our ways to the future, I want to echo what Mindy said about mission, what Jeremy said about community organizing. I think our first step in going to the future is to go back to mission, to not be so hung up on programs or categories or even organizational structure, but to remember our calling, and our calling is serving the community. In this moment, as I've seen CDCs step into new roles, I'm conscious that the CDCs evolved originally, and in my own experience, certainly, in communities where there are a plethora of organizations, community organizations, youth organizations, arts organizations, and many of those have fallen by the wayside in the last 20 and 30 years, and the CDCs are among the few left standing. And being true to mission might mean stepping back and not going into mission drift, but maybe not being so anchored to particular programs, but looking at new forms and new services and stepping into vacuums that weren't there when the organization was founded, but which are very much in front of us. And new kinds of participatory examination where artists play a role, as we've seen in Philadelphia and many neighborhoods, using arts as a way of engaging, using artists as some of the most imaginative people, recognizing the artistic and creative capabilities of people who are not formally artists are huge strengths that the CDCs bring. So back to mission. And I would say secondly, back to values. The CDCs, community-based development, were very much born of the civil rights movement and of the commitment to racial equality and success and opportunity. And we need to assert those values again. And the Black Lives Movement is giving us a chance to reaffirm, reconnect to our own roots and be more overt that this work is about social justice, racial inclusion, racial equity, equitable development, all the terms we use, but we sometimes forget as we get our nose to the grindstone and we start working at those program details. So our chance, I think this is a wonderful moment to recognize our roots and our origins in racial justice, and to reclaim in our own spirits and in our own programs how that works. And that's not just in mission language, but we ought to not give ourselves a pass because we've been doing good work, but thoroughly look at our own organizations and see whether in the empowerment of the community, in the governance of the organization, in hiring and promotion practices, in the shape of programs, whether we're really forthright and explicit and measuring ourselves against issues of racial equality. And I think finally, the last point I would make is this also brings us back to advocacy, that what Dr. Fullilove demonstrated in her slides is once again a recognition that we're up against systemic racism, systemic discrimination against people of color, against any group we can stigmatize and make the problem. And we need to be part of a larger social change. We're not gonna, we knew in the origins of the CDC movement as it came out of the poverty program that people in very creative, successful programs were recognizing that we cannot service our way out of poverty. We now, 50 years later in CDCs, know we can't program our way out of poverty. We can't development project our way out of poverty or to revitalization. When the deck is stacked against us, when the deck is stacked against our neighborhoods, our people, when the deck is stacked by suburban discrimination against the city itself and other, and not necessarily urban situations, people who are excluded from the mainstream. So we've got to be part of systemic change, and we've got to go back to more clear involvement. And this moment is giving us a chance to do that, because CDCs will not carry that fight. CDCs can be part of that alliance. So we need to look around, find the people that are moving, and find our connection, find our unique niche. There's probably nobody that understands disinvestment and redlining in all kinds of dimensions in its mechanical form as CDCs. Other people understand it as a pain. They understand it as a yoke to be thrown off. But we understand how it works because we've been putting together these deals with these screwy niche financing mechanisms that are pushing against a larger system that's not working. We have something unique to contribute. We need to be part of those. And I think, recognizing what we're doing, that we are broad, going back to mission, going back to values, seizing on advocacy will be the North Star that enables us to steer our organizations into a new future.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joe. I definitely feel what you are saying, especially as someone who formerly worked as a commercial corridor manager and is currently still committed to that work in a broader sense. So I want to take just a slight break to remind everyone to keep this conversation going. Yes, it's great to speak in the chats, but please take this to Twitter, use the hashtag #EquitablePhilly, and make sure that you ask a question if you have a searing point and a question to make. Questions only, actually, in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to that. Thank you. I have a question for everyone on the panel, all panelists, and I'll ask that you keep your responses to about a minute. But there were many things that came up during your presentations, and one of the main things for me was, how do you see the work that we currently do, whether it's as a CDC or a smaller nonprofit, or nonprofit developer, in this age of really apocalypse. We are in a space in which all veils are being broken. We're in a space of deep upheaval. The world in which we have known it, in all of its, glory and all of, its despair, is being destroyed. How do you see the work that you currently do, and how do you see the work that we do in a broader sense continue through this apocalypse? Where do we go from here? Really heady question, 1 minute answer. And we'll start with Mindy, Dr. Fullilove, please.
That's pretty funny. Okay, so where do we go from here? I think Milton Glasser had it right. We have to go forward together. And we are not identical, not having the same experiences, but yet we have to find the togetherness. The more we are divided and fighting with each other, the more we're just going down. So how do we get to together? And I do believe, as the urbanists teach us, that organizations can be the mesh. And so CDCs, as part of the organizational structure of their cities, can convene all the other organizations. And if each organization takes a piece of this, it will stabilize the social fabric.
Thank you so much. Jeremy, same question.
Yeah, for sure. To build on what Mindy said, I think, and actually to sort of be sandwiched in between what Mindy and Joe have both said, it does feel like it's time to rethink the structures that we impose on ourselves. These are some of the challenges that we face trying to operate within a sort of broader mainstream society that is inherently built on structures of white supremacy. So there are structures that exist now, even within CDCs, that are manifestations of that. And how we move beyond those, I think, is a really important next step, that we have to stop being our own worst enemy in some ways in those instances. Some examples of this are, for instance, the sort of over deterministic or overemphasis on the technical capacities of real estate development, for example, in a CDC, alluding to what Joe had mentioned earlier, the organizing and the human development capacity. The both funder-driven as well as sort of market-driven, many CDCs have moved into spaces where they are operating sort of real estate development businesses to be able to sustain their operations. And again, that's a totally understandable situation, but how do we move past those structures to move forward together?
Thank you so much. Joe, same question.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, we got to make sure we don't go back to business as usual. And that's our own business too, not just other people's business. And I think we got to recognize what's coming out of this movement at the moment is a recognition. There were a lot of people who wanted to be involved and wanted to be talking. And we didn't provide the forums for those voices to be heard. And we got to do a better job at that. We got to go back to the C in Community Development Corporation and work on that community side and not temporize. I think what the movement is saying, whether it's the quick release of police videos or a quick dialogue about which monuments we should tear down and what they mean, we've got to recognize that the speed at which people want the dialogue to happen exceeds the mechanisms that even we have put in place. And I think we've got to find new ways to have more instantaneous engagement of people at every level of the community around an issue that comes to the fore. It doesn't, we don't have time for 2-year commissions. that we had a commission, we had a thing after Freddie Gray uprisings here in Baltimore, and even the people that were put in charge, you could say, this is going to be business as usual. And 5 years later, business as usual. We're not there, and we have to be more aggressive.
Tempest, can I just jump in to say, I feel like instant also needs to be persistent, right? I think the challenge around how we have communities more ready and prepared to have agency over those situations is by having a persistent connections that we can, turn on in an instant when issues or circumstances call for. So I think it's a great point.
Right. I have a question regarding trauma, right? And the ways in which we are living and working in the midst of a loop of trauma, a loop of death, Black death, trans death. We're surrounded by, the numbers, the names, the footage. And I'm very, very interested, Dr. Fullilove, in the ways in which CDCs and practitioners can work in ways that are more trauma-informed, especially in spaces that are continuously triggering and traumatizing. And just a follow-up question to that, how can we do this work and engage our community without re-traumatizing them? Any best practices?
What's obvious to all of us is that we're in a different time from where we were in January. I am co-author of a book about ending police violence. And, it's a public health approach. And so it goes into all the statistics about the amount of police violence and descriptions of the amount of police violence. When it came out, my friends all said, "Oh, read your book." I was like, it's really a hard read. You don't have to read it on my account. And nobody read it. So, but I was really okay with that because I was traumatized writing it. I didn't want them to be traumatized reading it. But in this moment, it's a whole different kettle of fish. And actually, the publisher has made the book free. It's called From Enforcers to Guardians. Anybody can find the PDF on the internet. Share it with everybody you want. And because people are watching it on their videos, talking about it is a completely different experience. So we've been doing a book group at the University of Orange, and we had 250 people sign up for our book group. And we also had the help of Dr. Maricela Gomez, who Joe may know from Baltimore, who's a Buddhist, who helped us do meditation. So we started every one of the 4 book group meetings with a meditation. And then Dr. Gomez taught us, as you get agitated hearing about this stuff, come back to your breath. So being able to connect, that people are seeing this on their TV screen, so it's okay to read it in a book. And reading in a book helps them because then they have some facts to put under their impressions. But secondly, that we can use tools like mindfulness to keep us grounded. And similarly, 3 colleagues of mine and my colleague, Dr. Lourdes Rodriguez, met to talk about adverse childhood experiences, to make a video for kids with adverse childhood experiences, the traumas of childhood, and also adults, and what it's like sheltering in place. And it was a very frank, touching, important conversation that they had that we are posting as a help. So in a moment of trauma, you get to talk about things that in another time you don't. And there's no secrets right now. It's not hidden what people are feeling. But we have to create containers. And the container we have to create is of respect, it's of love. And we have these tools of mindfulness, we have to use those. I encourage everybody to step into the space and not to be afraid. And invite people to say what's on their minds. You don't have to go past it and say, I know you're traumatized. You don't have to do that, but say, how are you feeling is a wonderful thing to do in groups and very healing for people.
Thank you so much.
Did you say to people, I forget if in your introduction you said that I was a psychiatrist?
I didn't. I said that you were a scholar. But
Yeah. So I just want everybody to know I'm a psychiatrist. I don't have the usual kind of practice. I'm a social psychiatrist. So I do research on how social systems affect mental health. And I also am trained as a family therapist. So I do interventions in large systems. So this is something that I know about and think about for many decades.
okay, great. And once again, could you repeat the name of your book?
I'm happy to. It's From Enforcers to Guardians. And I actually can put the PDF in the chat.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you so much. Joe, I have a question for you. As we look at ourselves as CDCs and practitioners, oftentimes we find that we are mimicking the broader systemic issues and gaps around, white supremacist thought, technical skill over community, a scarcity model. How do you feel that CDCs and practitioners can break away out of that paradigm and create new spaces for themselves that are separate from white supremacist thinking and thought, and so that we're not inflicting the same harm, unintentionally in our communities that we're seeing?
It's a hard one. That's I think a very tough question. CDC's work first of all, CDCs have a great value to the community around the social capital issue that Dr. Fullilove was talking about earlier. The theory of social capital and the research and dialogue about it, particularly internationally, is about social capital being about both cohesion in the community, so-called bonding social capital, and bridging social capital that helps the relationships reach out to other relationships beyond the immediate. And CDCs have tremendous bridging capital for the community because we move in the circles of the banks and the programs and the business community better. But there's always the danger that you lose your soul while you're working with the enemy, if you will, working within the system. And I think so I've got a couple quick suggestions. It's a painful problem that I've tried to face it myself in my whole practice, my whole life. It's like, when are you selling out to get a program done, and when are you really about the agenda? And you've got to keep asking so the first thing is you've got to keep asking yourself that. You have to internally within the CDC be willing to step back and say, yes, we're getting the project done, but are we changing the creditworthiness of people in this community and the way they're able to matriculate in the mainstream? Two, we've got to open that question up to the community. There's got to be a lot more community pushing us. If nobody is bugging us about selling out, then maybe we aren't open enough to what's going on. The people in the community that feel the pain will keep us honest, and whether that's formal governance or informal engagement, we've got to be willing to be pushed that way.
Right.
And then I think the third thing is being part of alliances with other people. That not every organization needs to play the same role. Some organizations have got to be the point on confrontation. Some organizations have got to be the point on communication. Some organizations have got to be the point on negotiation. Some organizations have got to be the point on the back room thinking up, what we can make a deal for. There's a variety of roles to play in the systemic change. And so we got to figure out our niche, but we got to be with allies who are, if we aren't in close relationship with an organization who is point on confrontation, we will not be able to answer the question you asked.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's something to really sit on. Very quickly, Jeremy, because I want to get to more of the submitted questions, but I did have this question around arts-based creative placemaking the role that CDCs have used in art washing, and how have you seen, or how have you in your own practice been able to kind of bridge that gap between bringing community together through art, and also sometimes that same art being utilized to displace community. It's really difficult. It's very difficult to kind of walk that tightrope. But if you can kind of share what that's been like in your practice, or a tip that you can have for those navigating how to encourage art-based, work without art washing.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. In some ways, though, I feel that it's a tightrope when it comes out of a place that isn't starting with community, right? That I would almost suggest that, like, every place where it feels like there's been some kind of art washing happening, it's the arts or development or technical community, the real estate capacity has come from a place that isn't grounded in community. And so I don't know if I have a good example of where it started to happen and some change of approach has helped it shift course or gotten off that line, that tightrope, because I think it's fundamentally starts with, like, the right organizations working together. And so one of my favorite examples of this is in the Mission District in San Francisco, where there's plenty of art washing happening in the reclaiming of the Mission as a place that doesn't represent Latinx communities, through galleries and creative economy stuff, whatever. And it's pretty stark depending on which street you're on. But the Mission Economic Development Agency, in a really smart and strategic partnership with Galleria de la Raza, both of these two are long-standing Latinx serving of the community institutions, collaborated to deal with the problem of displacement of families from the neighborhood. And they collaborated to identify the most vulnerable culture bearers in the community and identify the apartment buildings that they were living in, and try to use their acquisition funds to do small site acquisitions of those apartment buildings. So while you might be actually protecting one cultural worker in a community who runs the gallery, the long-standing, like, youth gallery, whatever, from being displaced, you're also protecting 3 or 4 or 7 other families who are also being at risk of being displaced. So there's some really great examples, again, not of solving for that walking the tightrope, but, like, starting from a better place that, like, means that results in not even walking that tightrope to begin with.
Right. Thank you so much. We're going to have a fire round because I would like to make sure that people get out in time. But I wanted to make sure that some questions were asked. A question that was submitted prior to today by Deanna Butler from Nicetown CDC. She is a person who is very passionate about education and the ability to exercise the right to vote, and communicating. And she is very interested in what are the ways in which and tools that they can incorporate to outcry injustices within their community, and eliminate the sound of crickets in the room when fighting for justice in their community. If everyone can just say, or anyone who's most compelled to answer, we'll just have one person speak on what is a tip that they can use to encourage as they continue to outcry and fight injustices in their community. Whoever feels most compelled.
We're working with a group called Wakanda Dream Lab right now to, like, use speculative fiction as a way of, in some ways, telling stories about injustice by imagining an abolitionist future, an abolitionist world where the 64 and 94 like omnibus crime act bill and various bills never existed. In some ways, it's a way that we think you can utilize forms of art as a way of like engaging others and broader, constituencies, broader community members, a broader base in enlisting their voices as well, because you start with a form that's a really compelling form for folks.
Great.
PACDC has done a project in Philadelphia with Just Act and some other arts groups as using ways of getting larger participation and expression.
That's great. Shoshana Atkins asked, CDCs and government social service institutions are often operating against, also complicit in white supremacy, kind of calling back to a question I asked a bit earlier. Are there any strategies in which individuals that work in these institutions can combat white supremacist policies and structures in their work and workplace? Anyone who's most compelled?
Well, I would say that it's a really important question. And the thing is that in January, we were in a different organizational situation, and the organizations would have played all their usual tricks. But times have changed, and organizations are opening up their minds. One of the things that coming out of the 400 Years of Inequality project that Jerry mentioned I was involved with was that we recommended people look at their own history of their local places. And CDCs are about the local. So if the CDC can think about how does racism show up in the local, it helps them to see how they are part of that. What are the stories of the place? And then those are really good to share with the community, and also helps to support protest and move towards change. And we have a lot of materials on our 400 Years of Inequality website about how to do that.
And what's the name of that website again?
400yearsofinequality.org.
Thank you.
I think for people in social services, it's really important to dig into the values and core of social services thinking that's overturning the power dynamic that sees clients as the problem and providers as the answer. More asset-based orientation, more building resilience than supporting resilience, than handing out directives. I think it's a tradition in the profession to dig into, and I also think there is in the profession the opportunity for a greater amount of stakeholder involvement in governance of the agency and accountability and questioning not just of outcomes, but of the methods of practice. And I think you cannot change the institution yourself from the inside with just allies in the workforce. There have got to be people from the larger community, stakeholders, beneficiaries, families of beneficiaries of your services that have a stake in the way you do your work, that have got to open the windows and doors and bring them inside so that you're not alone in the conference room having that dialogue with your supervisor, that you're just sitting in the back of the room and let them take it on the head.
Right. Exactly. I will pull one last question before we go into closing. So many incredible questions. Thank you all. Thank you to all the participants for asking questions. We can have 3 more sessions from these incredible questions. So thank you so much. The last question for today is from Linda Richardson. CDCs led by people of color are often underfunded and understaffed. Originally, building capacity meant recruiting technical staff, often white people. How does this movement help those of us who have continued to organize based on being people of color, helping our own communities build power? And I think that everyone can share one way before we close out.
I just want to address a reference.
Sorry.
I just want to address a reference in the description. Originally, can you hear me?
You're going a little bit in and out.
Okay. Maybe I got excited and leaned in and blew my own system here. Originally, the CDCs didn't meant recruiting white people who were professionals. It was a very deliberate effort to recruit professionals of color with roots in the community to come back home and pay them decent salaries so they would. So Bedford Stuyvesant Restoration Development, the kind of granddaddy of the CDCs, hired this guy, Franklin Thomas, who was a deputy police commissioner, who grew up in Bed-Stuy, wound up being president of the Ford Foundation. Abyssinian, I lost it again. I lost my signal. Abyssinian CDC in Harlem. The minister found a young Wall Street lawyer who was complaining he was bored and said, I got a job for you. And he became the housing director of Abyssinian CDC. And now he's the president of the Ford Foundation. And he's committed the Ford Foundation to incredible breakthrough. So we should find a way to find the expertise we need within the roots of the community as well. We shouldn't just assume that all the professional that we expertise need is going to be not of the same background as the community. And those are just two examples. I could give many more of CDCs that committed themselves to find people of color who had roots in the community and drag them back, pay them to come back, do whatever. But it makes a difference.
I think what you say is true, Joe, but I think the question was about resources for people of color-led organizations. There was an op-ed in the Times in December, which really depressed me because it felt like my life was running before my eyes, and which said that a young white guy coming out of Harvard had a better chance to get $1 million grant to do his new idea for how to fight poverty than an African-American woman who'd been doing it for her whole life. And her grant was likely to be $20,000. And I just happened to get a grant for $20,000 the next day, which depressed me further. So there are real structural impediments. Certainly there are people of talent that can be brought to do the work, but getting the money for those of us who are people of color is dire. So I hope that's one of the things that changes in this time. And Linda, I feel you.
Absolutely. I think foundations are complicit and they need to make a commitment to supporting, because they're complicit not just because they have the money, but they'll say, to Mindy's point, like, well, we'll give you a grant, but you have to show us the capacity. And their view on capacity is completely complicit in this sort of mainstream racist sort of white supremacist model. Not all of them, obviously, but the vast majority of funding looks like that. I will say one positive approach would be to like open up your eyes to what talent in community development looks like outside of like the urban planning sector or the real estate finance sector, because I think there are tremendous talent outside of the sector. And one very specific example, a Black woman in Pittsburgh, Janera Solomon, who used to run the Kelly Strayhorn Theater, became one of the two leading organizer, advocate, conveners of the equitable economic inclusion policy that Pittsburgh passed, because she was asked, right? And she was engaged to be part of this work, and PolicyLink supported her to actually really be connected more deeply as a leader into that work. So it's an example of where you find talent. Actually, it also depends on where you look.
I agree. Throughout my career, I've seen instances of having to jump through a million hoops for very little money, with theory of change models presented and all sorts of things that people who have been shut out and marginalized from traditional higher education and nonprofit education would not know or have access to being able to encounter. And conversely, just a few weeks ago, had a conversation with a private equity firm who decided, because that week they felt really compelled to pour into Black and Brown led nonprofits, in which Achievability has a incredible Black woman ED, Jamila Harris Morrison, without having to do anything. They were able to give us a very substantial grant with a multi-year commitment. And I wish that far more organizations were able to access unrestricted funds, that's equal to what you would get at a Wells Fargo or something like that, without the huge strain on, you shouldn't need an army of nonprofit grant writers to be able to do the work that we do. And many times it does mean that, yes. So,
and Tempest, I would just say that I hope you go back and like set the terms of what you all feel like you need for private equity on your terms to like invest in all the work that's happening, and not just see them as a source of like grant dollars, because their ability to tap into money far exceeds their ability to just give you a direct grant.
Right, exactly. So we do actually have time for one more question before we go into final word and closing. I'd like to ask a question from Patricia Codina regarding working with the police in the post George Floyd world as a CDC. Is it possible to move towards systemic change in policing, change without partnering with the police? And is it possible to partner with the police without selling your soul and being complicit in the systems of oppression? A conundrum we are facing now. And I would like to just kind of add on to that question that many CDCs, particularly within the city, it is a part of our deliverables if we're a commerce-funded corridor to work and to show up with the police. And it's always been pretty difficult to balance those things, especially as people of color or people who understand the tense relationships between and often violent and abusive relationships between police and the communities in which they work and are supposed to serve and protect. So it's a deliverable oftentimes that we are working and partnering with the police. How can one navigate that in this post George Floyd, post Breonna Taylor, post A New Name Tomorrow world?
I'm happy to speak to that, having written a book about this. I think the issue is one Joe raised earlier, which is that you've got to have a lot of partners. And so if you're going to partner with the police, you also want to partner with Black Lives Matter or whoever is the lead rabble rousers, so that when the police do something bad, you say, we don't have your back for that. We're just going to, but we understand that people have safety issues. They want the police to enact safety. They don't want the police to be brutal. So if you have diverse partnerships, then I think you can balance it. But Hannah Cooper and I really think that you have to have a pretty big strategy in which community development corporations have an important role to play if you're going to tackle police violence. But policemen and women are people and need to be treated as people. Because they too suffer from the system of policing. So I think you can partner with the precinct, partner with the individuals, and fight the system.
I would agree. I feel that police officers and others in the system are individuals, and the challenge is like trying to understand what insights you can gain from how they perceive the system as well. Like one very specific example, this is very small, and I'll have something else to say about this, but if you look at the codes police officers use when they're reporting to the dispatch, whatever, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of codes about bad things, and there's never a code about anything like positive in a community. They can't report, they're not even equipped on a systematic level to be able to professionally see the positive in a neighborhood and a community, and that's an example of how broken it is. One very specific thing is I would encourage everyone to look at the CARES Act, AB 2054, which is pending in California now, which specifically funds pilot alternatives to police. Pilot projects that provide alternative means to safety, mental health, and whatnot that are specifically not police. So I wouldn't almost in some ways take it as a starting assumption that you have to partner with police. There needs to be efforts to move alternatives to invest in different community address strategies. And I'll share the link to it in the chat.
Oh, thank you, please do. I would love to see that $120 million that originally was going for a bump for our police department poured into the work that we do. How much incredible, poignant work could be done. Joe and everyone else, we will be closing soon. But I did want to give everyone the opportunity to have any last words. Is there anything on your heart or mind that you would like to share before we close out and give and hand the mic over to Pamela Bridgeford?
Thank you, Tempest, for a great job, and great to be with you, Jeremy and Joe. Really fun to be here. Thanks so much.
I want to thank and give a plug for PACDC. I think that there are very few cities in the country that have as formidable a trade organization, if you will, of community voices and community organizations with the breadth of participation, the credibility on both sides of the street, and the deep commitment to change that PACDC has been able, the role it's been able to play in marshaling all of your energies in Philadelphia. And you think the resource issues are tough for you in Philadelphia, you should see what it's like in other cities where there's no organization as effective as PACDC.
Yes. Oh, you've gone out? Okay.
I'll, while we're waiting to see if the connection reestablishes, I'll just say that to me, storytelling is so central. I think and the reason I bring that up is just because PACDC's most recent magazine around community developers and storytellers, I think, is so telling. It's just a right for this moment. And one very specific example of the power of that is the work of storytelling in Anchorage, Alaska, with the Cook Inlet Housing Authority led to a very specific sort of transformation of the whole organization top to bottom, where the CEO really is reclaiming the Alaska Native tradition of storytelling and oral traditions as a way of reclaiming the village values about how they do their work. I mean, it's literally about saying we lost our way, because this is Carol Gore, the CEO of Cook Inlet Housing Authority, where she says we lost our way because we got so caught up in the work of technical real estate things, and we lost our way around the village values, and we're reclaiming those now. And so storytelling is not just an output, a communication means, it's actually the method and means itself to actually undo the white supremacy structures in that organization. So that's just something I'll leave with, and I feel like that's a really telling moment for what we've been talking about.
All right, thank you. Joe, you got a little bit cut off, so I didn't want to take away any of your sentences.
Well, I thought I froze as I finished, but actually all of you froze and I kept going. So I felt like, you know, look at Johnny. He's the only one in step in the parade. So I missed Jeremy's comment. I'm sorry.
All right.
I thought I had finished my effusive.
You may have.
And all that you did.
I definitely.
We need you. We need your voice outside the city as well as in the city.
It has been an absolute joy and honor to facilitate and moderate these incredible minds and to hear from everyone during this Zoom webinar. Thank you, PACDC. Thank you to all of our sponsors. And with that, I will pass the mic over to Pamela Bridgeforth. Please make sure if you're interested in any of this work to continue the conversation on Twitter, Philly Equitable, Equitable Philly, hashtag Equitable Philly. Please make sure to like and check out all of our moderators, and also make sure that you go and like and check out Achievability. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and doing incredible work to push forward and end the cycle of poverty. Thank you so much. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you, Tempest. Thank you, everyone. I knew you would knock it out the park, and you did. And I'm just very grateful to join us, for having you join us today. I'm grateful for our participants who have, committed their time in hearing you and seeing the positive feedback we've been seeing in the chat box about today's conversation. I would encourage everyone, if you're interested in kind of making a deeper dive in this work, to visit the Dr. Fullilove's website, visit PolicyLink's website. Joe is a consultant with us on a lot of our work moving forward. So you'll be seeing a lot more of him as we move forward in the advance of our work throughout this year and into next year. We encourage you also, we are continuing this conversation on July 29th with Dr. Andre Perry and Jamira Burley. And then that'll be followed after July 29th with a conversation around youth and youth activism and how we can support that on August 12th. And we'll close out our Forward Equitable Development Conversations on September 2nd, talking very much about what was raised here at this conversation about, thinking about how we flip the switch or flip the paradigm, or, make radical change around philanthropy as it relates to grassroots organizations and supporting that work. And that'll be on September 2nd. And we'll be releasing information about each one of those conversations as they get more formulated, the subsequent workshops that will actually happen afterwards. So on July 29th, our goal is to have, after our plenary conversation with Dr. Perry and Jamira Burley, is to actually have a few workshops that people can actually get their hands around, some work they can take away with them. We'll also do the same thing on August 12th and September 2nd. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Dr. Fullilove, Joe, Jeremy, Tempest. Amazing work. Thank you so much. And we hope that you continue the rest of the day in safety and in happiness, and get outside and get some fresh air and get away from Zoom. Get away.
We hope.
Many
of us are running to another meeting. But yeah, self-care, right?
Thank you, Mindy.
Self-care.
Thank you, Joe.
Self-care.
Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye everyone.